Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Gerst. I've been hiring, firing, and mentoring executives, frontline employees, interns, and job seekers in companies around the world through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. I work with people in Hong Kong, India, Australia, and across the United States. What sets them apart? A lot, but there's more they have in common. And one of those commonalities is transition is a part of life. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions that are big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet, the people who can make the difference that matters to you right now. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big change. The insight track you're going to access during our future episodes is better than a crystal ball. It's the exact information you need to take that next step. Whether you're a new grad applying for your first professional job, someone looking to transition your work experience into a promotion, launching your own company, or maybe even starting to plan your retirement, you're in transition, and this series is for you. We all know transition can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have VIP access to the future you want. Are you tired of the uncertainty of being passed up? We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to the front of the line. So, if change is on your horizon, or maybe just the thought of change, you won't want to miss this discussion. It could be the exact edge you need to turn transition into an amazing opportunity. Tracy Hooper, thank you for being with us on this episode of People in Transition. Since we've first talked, I've really been looking forward to this conversation.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. It's my great pleasure. Thank you, Bob.
Tracy, when you were younger, what was it that you wanted to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a nurse. My grandmother was a nurse. My aunt was a nurse. And I thought, well, I need to be something. I'll be a nurse. And I went to the University of Maryland and majored in nursing. And in the middle of my sophomore year, I called my mother and I said, Mom, I'm failing out of school. And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, I'm getting A's and B's in my English courses, but I'm getting D's and F's in my science courses. I don't like science and I'm not good at it, clearly. And she said, well, Tracy, why don't you change your major? And I said, well, if I'm not a nurse, what am I going to be? And she said, why do you have to be anything? Why can't you just be educated? And I thought, yes, I'll be educated. And I went right to the South Administration building and changed my major to English, and I never looked back. Some people would say it's not very marketable having an English degree. I have found it to be quite marketable, but at the time, it was a relief to do something I was really good at doing, I was curious about, and I had success. Many times we don't follow that path.
Great mom advice, for sure. Tracy, and kind of paint for us the transition moments that you have gone through from that point when you decided not to be a nurse and chose to be educated to where you're at today.
Yes, well, Bob, we all think about the famous line of being with a company for 25 years and getting the gold watch. And in fact, my best friend in college, his father worked for IBM and worked for them for probably 40 years and got the gold watch and so forth. But I think many people know now that you don't have to do the same kind of work for your whole life. After I graduated from college, I was in college admissions for about 4 years and knew I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life, traveled around the state recruiting students to go to the University of Maryland. But after that, I had a friend say to me, Tracy, you like to read and you like to write and you're a good interviewer. You're interviewing students and parents all the time. You should think about TV news. And I thought, that's pretty interesting. Ironically, my dad was a sports broadcaster for almost 50 years in Baltimore, Maryland, my hometown. His name was Vince Bagley. He's passed away a couple of years ago. And I didn't really think about being in the news business, but when my friend said that to me, I thought, let me think about that. And I would work during the day, and then in the afternoon, late afternoon after work, I would go to a community college, and they let me borrow their video equipment, Bob, and I put together a couple of stories and then started applying to small television stations around the country and ended up at a tiny television station on the eastern shore of Maryland called WBOC, which stands for Between the Ocean, as in the Atlantic Ocean, and the Chesapeake Bay, WBOC. And I started there as the weather girl. That was the very professional title those of us who were women in the weather industry got. And I remember meeting with the news director, and he said, "I know we've hired you to be a reporter, but we'd like you to do the weather for a while." I said, "Well, I don't know anything about the weather." And he said, "That's okay. The sports guy will teach you." And sure enough, Marty Thorson, who'd been doing weather and sports since the weather guy walked off the set, became my coach. And on Monday, he started teaching me about the weather, so to speak. And by Friday, I was on the air. And that was my first experience in talking about experiencing, not talking about, experiencing what it takes to become confident. And what it takes is a lot of practice. And every night I'd get on the air and I'd make lots of mistakes, and the viewers certainly let me know, but I would get better and better and better. And then I went from there to WBAL TV in Baltimore, my hometown, and I did weekend weather and was a weekday reporter. And then I was at WFSB in Hartford, Connecticut, and I was a reporter and an anchor there. And so the point of this journey is that sometimes people who know us well can give us ideas of what we can do to pursue a path that we hadn't thought about. And that's what my friend Kelly did for me. And I was in TV news for a long time and decided I didn't want to do that forever, and continued to do voiceover work, produce corporate videos, host them, anchor them, and doing continuing voiceover work to what I'm doing today now, which is the Confidence Project. A lot of moving parts.
Trace, I know that you have a new book out, Now Hello. Can you tell our listeners what that book is about? Who's it written for? And I guess the third part is, what are the 2 or 3 things that you want someone that reads it to get from it?
Yes, my book is called The Now Hello. I will tell you, I wrote a book last year called The New Hello, which was in response to the pandemic, last year being 2020, 2021. I really felt that all of a sudden, everyone's world changed drastically. Whether you had always worked from home or whether you were always in an office, whether you lost your position, lost your job, downsized, whether you decided you didn't want to work in that industry anymore, everyone's life changed. So I wrote The New Hello, which is how do we meet and greet and connect with each other in the new world of work? And almost immediately after that book was published, I thought, I have a lot more that I need to share with people based on what I've experienced and what my clients have told me too. So I wrote the Now Hello, which is, what's the confidence playbook now? How do we connect with each other? How do we network? How do we have conversations now? People are rusty. They haven't been in person. They haven't been face to face. When we're on a Zoom call or a Skype call, it's very prescriptive. Let's get in there and do the work. Let's concentrate on what is the matter at hand. But we've missed all that back and forth, the comfortability of small talk and getting to know each other and having conversations around the water cooler. So the Now Hello really is what to say and what to do in the world of work now. And I have to say, I'm thrilled with this book. And here's who it's for. It's for any person who wants to be able to connect with confidence. I want you to open up the front of the book and look at the table of contents and say, okay, I want to read or learn more about how to have a confident conversation. Or in another chapter, I'd really like to know about how to network now. How do I network online? How do I network if I never meet someone in person, if we only meet by Zoom? And then when I do meet them, if I'm not comfortable shaking hands yet, or if I'm still wearing a mask, or they're wearing a mask, or I'm not wearing a mask, but I want to be respectful of them, how can we continue to connect with each other in this new world we live in? The idea is really that it's a playbook for any professional who wants to polish up their skills and amp up their professional presence, how they carry themselves with confidence. And it's a very easy read. Pick a chapter, sparks your interest, read it, highlight it, bend the pages back, and enjoy it. I've gotten a lot of success because people feel like it's a doable book. For instance, one of the areas that we talk about is if you're in a networking situation and it's live, you're in person, and you're in a conversation with another person and you see someone on the outside who wants to join that conversation. How do you welcome them into the conversation? So I say, this is what you do. You extend your hand, and this is what you say. Come join us. We were just talking about. And then you fill in the blanks. And that way the person is right into the conversation. Or if you want to join a conversation, but you don't know whether you should join in or not, that awkward feeling we have. Are they having a private conversation? Am I disturbing them? What do you do? Well, here's the technique that I talk about in the book. The technique is toe to toe means no. So if two people are toe to toe and their eyes are engaged and they're not looking around, that means they do not want to be interrupted. But if somebody's foot is turned out to the side and they're glancing around a bit, that's the perfect, classic nonverbal cue that the door is open and you can enter the conversation and say something as simple as, "May I join you? I just heard you talking about your vacation." Or, "May I join you?" And most people will say, "Absolutely, come join us. We were just talking about Alicia's promotion." And that way, these are skills that you can use in everyday situations that can make you feel more confident in any area of your life.
Why do the words we use matter in our job search process?
They matter because they can distinguish us from other people. They can be the difference between being like every other candidate and being someone who is intriguing, who's interesting, who's experienced and successful, and is confident in talking about it. The words we use make a huge difference on two areas, Bob. Not only how other people see us, but how we see ourselves. If we speak with more confidence, if we use what I call words to use, then not only do we feel more confident, but other people have more confidence in us. And then it becomes this virtuous cycle going upward.
And how do you grow that muscle of using words that are impactful? What are some of the things you can do to improve in that area?
Well, the first thing you can do is you can record yourself. And that sounds painful, and it is. But the only way that you can really have an awareness of what words you may overuse. For instance, we all know fillers, the usual suspects. Like, we use those words on a regular basis, but we don't know we use them unless we record ourselves. And I encourage people to take your cell phone, put it up on a shelf, and press record. And either pretend as if you're having a conversation, or you could ask a friend or a colleague if you could record a conversation. And in the beginning, they'll think this is awkward, and it is. But after a couple of minutes, you all will get into a comfortable conversation about your latest vacation or the new job you're looking for or an interesting article you read in the Wall Street Journal. Then you'll have that back and forth, that natural back and forth, and you'll be able to hear those what I call words to lose, those filler words. And filler words is just one group of words to lose. Once you have an awareness of those words, then you can begin to practice what I call the power of pause. For instance, a hedge word. We talk about hedges. Hedges are those small, sneaky add-on words that we use because we don't want to come on too strong. We don't want to be too aggressive. We don't want to seem domineering or demanding. Therefore, we hedge using words such as just, I'm just following up, or I'm just checking back, or I'm just circling back to see. What you really are saying is, would you please answer my email? I want to know whether I'm in line for the next round of interviews. But we use that word just to soften it. When you practice the power of pause, take out that word. I'm circling back to see if you've had a chance to start interviewing people for the second round. That awareness of what word could be a weak one for you, and then practicing the power of pause to not only prepare you for what you want to say when you pause, but it also gives other people a chance to absorb what, or process what you've just said, or get ready for some interesting comment you're about to make. You can also take out those weak words in the middle, fillers, hedges, and others.
So, Tracy, what do you think recruiters think of a candidate if they're using those filler or hedge words, or if they don't understand that power of the pause?
I think recruiters are exhausted. They're talking with a lot of candidates. If everyone sounds the same, and by the same, I mean there are trendy words as well that people use all the time. And one of those words is right. Right? We use that often. That I'm hearing that a lot in our culture. And when you're in an interview and you're using fillers, like, or hedges, just, sort of, a little bit, actually, maybe, those are hedge words. When you use those words, you sound like everybody else. And it's important to be yourself. And remember, Bob, we're influenced by our culture, either by the culture we grew up in, our families, if our parents, our elders spoke a certain way, we tend to imitate that. But we're also influenced by popular culture. The words we hear in popular culture, we tend to imitate and say because we want to fit in. So if we use the word right in between every other sentence in an interview, it gets boring. It doesn't show creativity. It doesn't show mastery of your subject because you're using words that everybody else is using. And I'm not sure recruiters are necessarily aware of this. What I think they are aware of is when someone has more of a command of the language and speaks in a way that promotes their success, their experience, their cooperation, being a good colleague, and creativity.
Tracy, do you coach women and men differently in the power of communication?
I do not. People are people. And our language, the way we express ourselves, the way we carry ourselves, the way we show up in a room is the same for everybody. Now, people will say to me, what's the difference between confident, and cocky? What's the difference between confident and cocky? And this is what I say to them. Here's cocky. Here's the example. I was meeting a gentleman for the first time who'd had a fabulous career at a big sports apparel company. And I said to him, Tell me about you. What's your sweet spot? What are you known for? And he said, with a matter of fact tone of voice and a pleasant look on his face, I'm an expert at leading large global teams. That's it. He said that without any bravado. Now, here it is. Here's cocky. I'm an expert at leading large global teams. You know how someone kind of leans in and winks at you and has that kind of puffed up expression? That wasn't him at all. You can say exactly what your skills are with good posture, with a neutral look on your face, raising your eyebrows, that shows expression, that shows you're aware, you're connected to another person, and make a statement. I'm an expert at leading large global teams. And I thought, let me ask you more. I couldn't get enough because he was so confident in his experience and success. If he had said it in a cocky way, I would have been turned off. And that may have abruptly ended the conversation, not immediately, but after a few minutes. But instead, he brought me in because he was comfortable with that. And so I think the way women and men present themselves can be exactly the same. Trust yourself. I always say when you're in an interview, you know from your own experience, Bob, whether this works for people you work with, but in my experience, have your notes with you, have bullet points with you to be able to reference them. And in an interview, say, I've brought my notes so I can stay on track. Or I brought my notes to confirm some areas I wanted to speak about. Most people would love that. Most recruiters would love that because, in my view, without notes, we wander. And whatever happens when you're in an interview, you go on and on and on, and people glaze over. And then that could be the reason why you're not selected. Sometimes people talk too much. When we're nervous, we tend to speak really fast and cram a lot of words in together. And that's a telltale sign that we're not confident. Slowing your speech down, taking your time, practicing the power of pause, choosing your words carefully can make all the difference.
And Tracy, let's say that you accomplish this, getting rid of your filler words, hedge words. It may come across as being very formal, almost sterile. How do you make certain that you don't have that stiffness in your communication style?
Thank you for that question, Bob. Here's the answer. One word: practice. Practice. There's no substitute for it. I gave a presentation on Monday to a big energy company in the Washington, D.C. area. I practiced my intro for that presentation. Oh, I was on vacation last week. Every single day, hiking, I would say it over and over and over again, so that when I started that presentation, it looked like water rolling off a duck's back. I'm trying to think of a good analogy. It was easy for me. Jerry Seinfeld, before he ever performed for the first time on The Tonight Show, rehearsed his 4-minute monologue 200 times. That's why it sounded so smooth. Here's another example. I was getting ready to be on a talk show here in Portland, Oregon, where I live. And I talked to the producer about the theme. I'd set a list of questions for the host to ask me. And then about a week before the presentation, I put my cell phone on the shelf. I call it a shelfie. I pressed record and I practiced my answers. And in that 6-minute mock interview between my cell phone and me, I used the word so 13 times. I had no idea that that was one of my words to lose. Therefore, between then and the interview, I was able to practice those answers without having to use the word so. And by the way, I talk a lot about words to lose, but there are plenty of words to use, and this could be very helpful for your listeners. Words to use could be from my perspective, or what I know after 10 years in the publishing industry or in the tech industry or in education, what I know. That's a very powerful words to use. Our data shows. I'm an expert at evaluating data, might be something one of your listeners would say. When you talk about data, people can't really argue with it. The data is there. Or I recommend we go with this proposal. I recommend it to my team that we go this way with the project. And the result was, and then you can fill in the blanks. Anytime you can use these powerful phrases, it can make a big difference, but you need to practice them so that it doesn't sound stiff.
Tracy, if you were coaching a candidate who's looking for a job and they're wondering how they can prepare for the questions that they might be asked during that interview so that they are most impactful, what's the 2 or 3 things that you would coach them to ensure they're doing?
Well, number one, I would say scour through the website of the company and any other information you can get on LinkedIn about the person who's interviewing you. And many times you can find out about what that person cares about by scrolling down to the recommendations section on LinkedIn. And one area is to look at the recommendations that they have made about other people. But the other part is to look at the recommendations that they've given about other people. You can see what people have said about them and what they say about other people. That focuses on what they're interested in. That's one idea. The other is if you have a chance to talk with someone else who works for the company or works in the industry, that can be helpful too. Those would be my top 2. I think we have so much available to us, Bob, at our fingertips with websites and social media that it really does help to prepare for interviews that way. And then I believe in the power of story. If you have something you want to make sure that a recruiter knows about you, have a story around that. And by a story, I mean a 1-minute story. There's a great quote by Mark Twain that said, "I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have enough time." It takes a lot of time to edit down what we want to say. If you have a story, make sure you have a strong open, tell what the problem is, the solution, and a strong close. And you can do that in a minute or a minute and 45 seconds. People relate to stories. That's why TV and movies are so compelling, because people love to see pictures. They think in pictures and they love to hear people talking and the dialogue. And anytime you can bring a story about your experience and success into an interview, it makes a big difference. And I'd like to talk about that for a moment too. People say, well, I've had a lot of experience doing this or that. Well, that's good, but that doesn't mean you're successful at it. We all know Willie Loman, Death of a Salesman. He had a sales career for 25 years and he was terrible, highly unsuccessful. When you talk in an interview, I would talk about your experience and your success. Be able to talk about those data points where you can point to success. And the other piece that I recommend is to talk about third-party proof. And that would be what other people say about you. If you're in an interview, say, I'm known as the colleague who. My boss told me that my sweet spot is, or my superpower is this. People know me as the organized colleague who always asks the deeper questions. That way, you are letting other people brag about you. You're not bragging about yourself. It's other people I'm known as, people know me as. And that is a very powerful tool to be able to give credibility to your experience and success.
What about social media communication? Is that somehow different than in person? And then it leads to building that personal brand. And so, how do you manage that social media communication?
For me and for my clients who are professionals, I think there's no substitute for LinkedIn and Instagram. Hardly do anything on Facebook. That's not where my clients are. And I believe we need to be active on LinkedIn, but not overactive. I like to share what other people have posted. Since my book has come out, I've done 28 short videos on some of the pro tips in the Now Hello, and I have put those on LinkedIn. I'm not super active. What I do is I keep in touch with people that way. I congratulate them if I see they've won an award or they've had a paper published or they've gotten a new job, but I don't overuse that. I believe that there's no substitute for one-on-one connection. And we're beginning to do that more now with people meeting each other. But I do a lot of my work virtually. I invite people for a virtual coffee. I think that's a great way to start a conversation. Would you be available for a virtual coffee, for a 30-minute virtual coffee by Zoom? Almost everybody says yes. And I believe that everybody's favorite subject is themselves. Therefore, when you're in a conversation with someone, focus on them. You don't want it to be 80-20. You certainly want to talk about yourself. But when I'm hosting a discovery call with a prospective client, and your listeners would be interested in this too, I spend the first 20 minutes of that 30-minute call asking them about them. If you are looking for a job, if you're having some kind of discovery call with a potential client or a recruiter, talk about the company. Ask about the company. And these are the best words to use. Ask what, how, and tell me more. I call these the magic words for a confident conversation because they open up a conversation. If you ask, do you like your job? Yes or no. That's a closed-ended conversation. But if you ask, tell me what you like most about working at this company. Tell me more about that. That expands the conversation. What do you find is your biggest challenge working in a hybrid environment? That expands the conversation. How did you get started working in this industry? That expands the conversation. Those three words, what, how, and then the phrase, tell me more, are game changers for a confident conversation. And once you begin to ask people about themselves, then subconsciously they think, this person is interesting. This person is curious. They might fit in with our company. And then at the end, if you feel it's been mostly about them, you could certainly say, I want to be mindful of our time. I always say that to people. I promised 30 minutes and we're almost there. I want to be mindful of our time. May I tell you some of the highlights of the Confidence Project? And then they say, oh, yes, of course. And then I have my pitch, I call it 10 seconds of you. The 30-second elevator pitch is over, Bob. We know that. First of all, people don't like to ride in elevators anymore, and people are not that interested. They're distracted. I encourage people to have a 10 seconds of you that you could say that would get people's attention.
Tracy, if you were coaching someone to implement 2 action points starting Monday that you think would help them in their job search, what were the 2 things that you would suggest that they do?
Well, number one, I would suggest that they find opportunities to network and not think of networking as a dirty word, something to be afraid of. Absolutely not. Think of it as getting to know someone, to learn something about an industry, to make a new friend. And when I encourage people to network, if you're going to a networking event, find 2 or 3 people ahead of time who you think may be there and learn something about them. Go on LinkedIn, find out about them, and look for them at that event. If you see someone you know, great, say hello and ask those magic words. First of all, offer them a compliment. Great to see you. What brings you here? Tell me how you're doing. And then try to find those other people there and ask them about them. I'm still a business card girl. I love my business cards. I know people have their QR codes with their contact information, but there's nothing better than saying, before we finish speaking, do you have a business card? I'd like to keep in touch with you. Then you exchange business cards or you get their contact information. Have it be a conversation. You're not getting a job at a networking event. You're simply meeting people. And number 2, I would recommend that everybody have their own personal board of advisors. Those are people who know and care about you, who have your best interest at heart, and who you want to get their support. And ask them if you could meet with them every month, once a quarter, to talk about what you're doing, what you're looking for, and how it's going. These are people who care about you, and they'll be flattered that you ask them.
Tracy, any books or other resources that you would recommend to someone who is going through their own personal transition?
I think you'll get a lot of information from the Now Hello. It really is written for any professional who wants to amp up their professional presence and really show up with more confidence in the world. I think that you can learn a lot from TED Talks and podcasts like yours, Bob. And I think the more you can listen to what's out there and get ideas from people, it can make a big difference. There is a podcast by a fellow named Mac Pritchard, and it's called Find Your Dream Job. And that is, along with yours, very valuable information for people who are searching for their next opportunity. And by the way, I would say to your listeners, don't say I've lost my job or I'm thinking of making a transition. Say I'm in between opportunities and I didn't want to miss the chance to speak with you. That's a great phrase you can use with people. I'm in between opportunities and I've admired you for a long time. I didn't want to miss the chance to speak with you. Do you have time for a 30-minute virtual coffee by Zoom? And then say, yes and no are both good answers, or yes, no, and not now are all good answers.
Tracy, if our listeners remember only 3 things from our conversation today, what are those 3 things that you want them to take away?
I want them to take away that your words have impact. And if you choose your words wisely, that will make a big difference in how you present yourself. Number 2, there's no substitute for practice. Practice makes permanent. Practice makes progress. It's not about being perfect. You don't want to be perfect because you're always on that pedestal you could fall down from at any point. Practice makes progress. And number 3, trust yourself that you have great experience and success and that somebody out there is looking for you. It is a numbers game. You will have to talk to a lot of people perhaps, but if you trust yourself, if you practice, if you know that there's a good job out there for you, you'll find it.
Tracy, I so appreciate the insights, the words that you helped us grow in, the caring that you brought to sharing your experience. Thank you so much.
You are very welcome. I appreciate the opportunity, Bob.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. We're working in unprecedented times as the world responds to the recent COVID-19 crisis. The fact is that even those who are not in transition understand it could be right around the corner, next month or a year from now. The purpose of these episodes are to give listeners support and the critical tools to adjust with the winds, wherever they come. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully, perhaps gracefully or without too many battle scars, survived their own obstacle courses and can share useful information on how to steady your ship or your world in this uncertainty. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on social media. If you have any questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I appreciate your time you're investing in sharing these important conversations with me, my guests, and others who are going through life transition. Transitions between jobs, life stages, new entrepreneurial ventures, or whatever life brings. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode of People in Transition.